Hi all and welcome back to my Let's Read series of the Books of Oblivion. It's my companion piece to my Let's Play of Oblivion, where we're actually diving into some of the lore aspects of the game by reading some of the books. Today's book is called A Game at Dinner. It's an interesting one actually for us because it's a book in both Morrowind, Oblivion and Skyrim. I shouldn't say both, I should say all. And it appears to be the same text throughout, so it hasn't changed in any of them. And it's particularly about some of the characters in Morrowind. I'll be interested to see how many of the books continue through, so we'll have to wait and see. But without any more waiting around, let's go in. So it starts off with a foreword from the publisher. The history behind this letter is almost as interesting and dark as the story it tells. The original letter to the mysterious Duahain, I hate pronunciations of fake words, was copied and began circulating around the ashlands of Ardenfell a few months ago. In time, a print found its way to the mainland, and Prince Halalu Helsis palace outside Almalexia. While the reader may conclude after reading this letter, that the prince would be furious about such work, impugning his highness with great malevolence, quite the reverse was true. The prince and his mother, Queen Barazea, had it privately printed into bound copies and sent to libraries and booksellers throughout Morrowind. As a matter of record, the prince and the queen have not officially stated whether the letter is a work of pure imagination or based on actual occurrence. The House Dres has publicly denounced this work, and indeed no one named Duahain, despite the suggestions in the letter, have ever been linked to the house. We leave the readers to interpret the letter as he or she believes. It's a bit of a spy story, I think. And that's by Nariscan, the publisher. Dark Liege Duahain, you asked for a detailed description of my experience last night and the reasons for my plea to House Dres for another assignment. I hope I have served you well in my capacity as informant in the court of Prince Helseth, a man who I have stated in many previous reports could teach Molag Bal how to scheme. As you know, I've spent nearly a year now working my way into his inner circle of advisors. He was in need of friendship when he first arrived to Morrowind and eagerly took me and a few others. Still, he was disinclined to trust any of us, which is perhaps not surprising given his tenuous position in Morrowind society. For your unholiness's recollection, the prince is the eldest son of Barazea, who was once Queen of Morrowind and once the Queen of High Rock Kingdom of Wayrest. I find that interesting that there's quite a heavy exposition that the supposed intended reader wouldn't require, but we do require, so I'm glad it's there. At the death of her husband, Prince Helseth's stepfather, King Edwir, there was a power struggle between the prince and Edwir's daughter, the Princess Elisina? You wouldn't believe I read this once already. Though the details of what transpired are imperfect, it is clear that Elisina won the battle and became queen, banishing Helseth and Barazea. Barazea's only other child, Morgaya, had already left court to marry and become the queen of Summerworst Isle, Kingdom of Firsthold. So we have our background. We have political struggles between the higher-ups of a society and various people being banished and disowned and so on and so forth. Barazea and Helseth crossed the continent to return to Morrowind only last year. They were well received by Barazea's uncle, our current king, Halalu Athin Lathan, who had taken the throne after Barazea's abdication more than 40 years ago. Barazea made it clear that she had no designs on reclaiming the throne, but merely to retire to her family estates. I wonder what happened there. I wonder if she was forced to abdicate. Or he was forced to abdicate. Oh, right, yes. Yeah, banished. Yeah, sorry, it was in the previous thing. I do like this Game of Thrones-esque fantasy fiction between various people. It's good. Halseth, as you know, has lingered in the royal court, and many have whispered that while he lost the throne of Wayrest, he does not intend to lose the throne of Morrowind at Lathan's death. I wonder why Unholiness is his formal greeting. I've kept your Unholiness informed of the prince's movement, meetings and plots, as well as the names and characters of his other advisors. As you may recall, I've often thought that I was not the only spy in Halseth's court. I told you before that a particular Duma councillor of Halseth looked like a fellow I had seen in the company of Thola Sirione, the archcanon of the Tribunal Temple. Another, a young Nord woman, has been verified to visit the Imperial Fortress in Balmora. Of course, in their case, they may as well have been on Halseth's own business, but I couldn't be certain. I began to think myself paranoid as the prince himself when I found myself doubting the sincere loyalty of the prince's chamberlain, Burgess, a Breton who had been in his employ since his day in the court of Wayrest. That is the background on that night, last night. So we're setting up a plot of intrigue where we don't know the various motivations of quite a few characters. And the only person who we do know the motivations for is infamous for plotting. So it's setting up like... I have to say, when I was reading through this, I was hooked immediately and wanting to carry on reading because it wasn't written too simply or plainly. There was enough flourish to the words, but also it set up intrigue, and I was like, okay, what's going to happen next? So here we go. Yesterday morning, I received a curt invitation to dine with the prince. Based only on my own paranoia, I dispatched one of my servants, who is a good loyal servant of the House of Dres, to watch the palace and report back anything unusual. Just before dinner, he returned and told me what he had witnessed. I have to say, thinking about it as well, I think this story is uniquely Morrowindy, and what I mean by that is it manages to set up a complicated situation and have it focused around intrigue and politics and so on. Whereas I always feel like in Oblivion, there's more interest in the grander scheme, big narratives, and so I don't know if this is true with all the books. We've only read a couple, so the only two we have read from Oblivion don't point in this direction. But from the actual stories told in the game, Oblivion's like a lot bigger. You know, you're immediately doing big things in your quest lines. You know, the battle for Kvatch, things like that. Where I think about Morrowind, and you're not stuck, but you can choose to spend a long time in Balmora before you're doing anything else, and you're advised to go to become a member of the guilds and become a member of society. So I think it's interesting that this story sort of represents that. There's no big hero, it's just intrigue and people being political with each other. A man cloaked in rags had given entrance into the palace and had stayed there for some time. When he left, my servant saw his face beneath the cloak. An alchemist of infamous repute, said to be the leading supplier of exotic poisons. A fine observer, my servant also noticed that the alchemist entering the palace smelled of wickweed, bittergreen, and something alien and sweet. When he left, he was odourless. He had come to the same conclusion I did. The prince had procured ingredients to prepare a poison. Bittergreen alone is deadly when eaten raw, but the other ingredients suggest something far deeper. As your Unholiness can doubtless imagine, I went to dinner that night prepared for any eventuality. All of Prince Halfeth's other councillors were in attendance, and I noticed that all were slightly apprehensive. Of course, I imagined that I was in a nest of spies, and all knew of the prince's mysterious meeting. It is just as likely that some knew of the alchemist's visits, while others were simply concerned by the nature of the prince's invitation, and still others merely unconsciously adopted the tense disposition of their fellow, better informed councillors. See, I think that was a good sentence. The prince, however, was in fine mettle, and soon had everyone relaxed and at ease. At 9 we were all ushered into his dining hall, where the feast had been laid out. And what a feast! Honeyed go apples, fragrant stews, roasts in various blood sauces, and every variety of fish and fowl, expertly and ostentatiously prepared. Crystal and gold flagons of wine, Flynn, Shine, and Matza were at our seats to be savoured as appropriate with each course. So that gets at like some of the etiquette involved with a noble's table. As tantalising as the aromas were, it occurred to me that in such a maze of spices and flavours, a discreet poison would be undetectable. I think it's interesting whenever narratives touch on food. Like if you think about Redwall, which I know is a children's book, but one of the big distinct things that stuck out to me about those books was the cooking and the food. And I thought I was kind of unique in that. But then you talk to anyone who read those books, and there's even cookbooks based on the series, and they go into it. So I think food can be a deep connection that you can have even with literature. And, you know, a maze of spices and flavours is a very evocative phrase. It suggests getting lost in a poison. Throughout the meal, I maintained the illusion of eating the food and drinking the liquor, but I was surreptitiously and swallowing nothing. Finding the plates and food were cleared from the table and a tureen of spicy broth was placed in the centre of the banquet. The servant who brought it then retired, closing the banquet hall door behind him. "It smells divine, my prince," said the Marchioness Colga, the Nord woman, "but I cannot eat another thing." "Your Highness," I added, feigning a tone of friendliness and slight intoxication, "you know that everyone at this table would gladly die to put you on the throne of Morrowind, but is it necessary that we gorge ourselves to death?" God, it is a table that is completely untrustworthy. The others at the table agreed with appreciative groans. Prince Halsey smiled. "I swear by Verneema the Grifter, my dark liege, even you have not seen a smile such as this one." Ironic words. You see, an alchemist visited me today, and as some of you already doubtless know, he showed me how to make the most marvellous poison and its antidote, a most potent potion, excellent for my purpose. No restoration spell will aid you once you've ingested this. Only the antidote in the tureen will save you from certain death. And what a death, from what I've heard. I am eager to see if these effects are all that the alchemist promised. It should be horribly painful for the afflicted, but quite entertaining. No one said a word. I could feel my heart pounding hard in my chest. "Your Highness," said Alarat, the Dunmer I suspected of alliance with the temple, "have you poisoned someone at this table?" Alarat, I'm sure, is a character in Morrowind, but I'd have to double check. By the way, Helsif, the prince in this, is actually in both the Tribunal DLC and Daggerfall as well, which I think is interesting. "You are very astute, Alarat," said the Prince Helseth, looking about the table, eyeing each of his advisers carefully. "Little wonder I value your counsel, as indeed I value all in this room. It would be perhaps easiest for me to say who I haven't poisoned. I haven't poisoned anyone who served me but one master. Anyone whose loyalty to me is sincere. I haven't poisoned any person who wants to see King Helsith on the throne of Morrowind. I haven't poisoned anyone who isn't a spy for the Empire, the Temple, the House of Talvani, the House of Redoran, the House Indoril, the House of Dres." See, that suggests there's far more houses than the ones we touched on in Morrowind. Your Unholiness," he looked directly at me at his last words. So the House of Dres. "I know that in certainty my face is practice at keeping my thoughts from showing, but I immediately thought of every secret meeting I've had, every coded message I sent to you and the house, my dark liege. What could he know? What could he, even without knowing, suspect?" I felt my heart beating even faster. Was it fear or poison? I couldn't speak, certain as I was that my voice would betray my calm facade. Those loyal to me who wish harm on my enemies may be wondering, how can I be certain that the poison has been ingested? Is it possible that the guilty party, or dare I say, parties, were suspicious and merely pretending to eat and drink tonight? Of course. But even the craftiest of pretenders would have to raise a glass to his or her lips and put empty forks or spoons in their mouths to play the charade. The food, you see, was not poisoned. The cups and cutlery were. If you did not partake out of fear, you're poisoned just the same, and sadly, missed an excellent roast. It's a classic fantasy story thing, isn't it? And even in films, it's like, but the drink's not poisoned, the rim of the glass was. Sweat beaded on my face. I turned from the prince so he would not see. My fellow advisers, all of them, were frozen in their seats, from the Marchioness Colga, white with fear, to Kemmer Ineb, visibly shaking, from the furrowed, angry brow of Alarat to the statue-like stare of the Burgess. I couldn't help thinking then, could the prince's entire councillorship be comprised of nothing but spies? Was there any person at the table loyal? And then I thought, what if I were not a spy myself? Would I trust Helseth to know that? No one knows better than his advisers both the depth of the prince's paranoia and the utter implacability of his ambition. If I were not a spy for the House Dres, even then would I be safe. Could a loyalist be poisoned because of not so innocent misjudgment? The others must be thinking the same, loyalists and spies alike. While my mind whirled, I could hear the prince's voice addressing all assembled. The poison acts quickly. If the antidote is not taken within 1 minute from now, there will be death at the table. I couldn't decide whether I'd been poisoned or not. My stomach ached, but I reminded myself it might have been a result of sitting at a sumptuous banquet and not partaking. My heart shook in my chest, and the bitter taste like charmer root stung in my lips. Game, was it fear or poison? These are the last words you will hear if you are disloyal to me, said Prince Helseth, still smiling that damn smile as he watched his advisers squirming in their seats. Take the antidote and live. Could I believe him? I thought of what I knew of the prince and his character. Would he kill a self-confessed spy at his court, or would he rather send the vanquished back to his masters? The prince was ruthless, but either possibility was within his manner. Surely the theatricality of this whole dinner was meant to be a presentation to instill fear. What would my ancestors say if I joined them after sitting at a table, eventually dying of poison? What would they say if I took the antidote, confessing my allegiance to you, the House of Dres, and was summarily executed? And I confess, I thought of what you might do to me, even after I was dead. I had grown so light-headed and filled with my own thoughts that I didn't see the Burgess jump from his seat. I was only suddenly aware that he had the tureen in his hands and was gulping down the liquid within. There were guards all around, though. I never noticed them entering. Burgess, said the Prince Helseth, still smiling. You have spent some time at Ghostgate. House Redoran? You didn't know? Burgess laughed sourly. No, House. I report to your stepsister, the Queen of Wayrest. I've always been in her employ. By Akatosh, you poisoned me because you thought I was working for some damnable dark elves. You're half right, said the prince. I didn't guess who you were working for, even that you were a spy, but you're also wrong about me poisoning you. You poisoned yourself when you drank from the tureen. Your Holiness, you do not need to hear how the Burgess died. I know that you've seen much over the many, many years of your existence, but you truly don't want to know. I wish I could erase the memory of his agonies from my own mind. The council was dismissed shortly thereafter. I do not know if Prince Helseth knows or suspects that I, too, am a spy. I do not know how many others last night, were as close as I was from drinking from the tureen before the Burgess did. I only know that if the prince does not suspect me now, he will. I cannot win at the games he's mastered long ago at the court of Wayrest, and I beg your Holiness, my dark liege Duahain, to use your influence in the House Dress to dismiss your local servant this charge. Muse is not the time. Publisher note. Of course, the anonymous writer's signature has not been on any reprint of the letter since the original. So there we go. Perfect time in the end to be distracted. That's not going to line up when I say it either because I haven't synced these videos up. But there we go. What do we think of that story? I think it sets up so much of what is interesting about Morrowind actually and not Oblivion, and is in contrast to Oblivion because of that fact. It sets up spies, intrigue, people doing the dirty against each other, but in subtle and petty ways as well. And none of that seems to exist so much in Oblivion. Oblivion's the big stories, the big narratives, the hero quest, whereas Morrowind is a lot more of these smaller little tidbits and politicking and intrigue. And that is my grand claim of this text. I wouldn't say I've fully played enough Oblivion to be 100% behind that, but I think I broadly stand by what I've just said with my 14 or so hours that I've currently played of this game. But it's interesting to see a book continue throughout all the games and to see how that contrasts against what we've read so far. But yeah, we're picking up a broad palette of different books and story types. Anyway, my name's been Billy. Thank you for listening and watching this video. If you do need anything else, I was just about to say get in touch with me. I was about to go into work mode. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.